All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Donadio. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Association of Counties. I want to welcome you to our final virtual workshop, this one entitled The Future of Foreclosure Sales. But before we get started, and I introduce just a terrific panel today, like we've had the past couple of weeks, there's a couple of housekeeping items that I'd like to take care of. If you have any questions throughout the course of the presentation, please make sure to put them in the Q&A box and don't use the chat box. Otherwise, Angela will tell you to use the Q&A box. And thank you to Angela for doing a great job and running all the technology. If you need continuing education credits, please make sure to see Kim Nolan in our office afterwards, and she will make sure to send you the certificates. This class has also been approved for CLE credits. So throughout the course of the presentation, there will be 4 questions that you'll have to answer. I'll make sure to read them to you. You'll have plenty of time to respond. You don't have to answer the questions correctly, but we do have it in order to get your CLE credits. I think it's approved for 1.3 CLE credits, so I'm very happy about that, and I know Mr. Fitzgerald is as well. So I think that's all that I have in terms of housekeeping. I am very pleased to introduce our sponsor for this event, Mr. Jesse Loomis, who is the CEO of Bid for Assets. So, Mr. Loomis, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse Loomis, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of bidforassets.com, a leading online auction site that helps sheriffs take their sheriff sales online. In October 2020, Bid for Assets helped Montgomery County, Pennsylvania Sheriff's Office pioneer Pennsylvania's first online sheriff sale. Whereas Montgomery County typically was only averaging 10 to 12 bidders at their live sales, their first online auction generated 113 bidders. Also, they were only selling 10% of their foreclosures to third-party bidders, but across their first 5 online auctions, they've sold over 57% of their property. The counties we've taken online have reported cutting REOs in half and doubling their poundage within a month or 2 of going online. Yesterday, the Sheriff of Philadelphia conducted their first ever online sheriff sale. Despite pulling occupied properties and only auctioning 17 properties, Bid for Assets brought over 200 bidders who placed over 1,300 bids and sold 76% of their property, including a commercial tire center for $556,000. We integrate with your civil process software, and we're already connected with CivilServe to make the process seamless, and our services are 100% free for your county. Please don't hesitate to contact Patrick or myself at the information you see on the screen there. I wish everyone to stay safe, stay healthy, and please enjoy today's workshop. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your support, and I appreciate you stuck to the 60 seconds. So that was outstanding. So thank you. So now I'm very pleased to introduce a panel of Michaels. So these are our individuals, subject matter experts. We got a good cross representation of law enforcement and our county councils as well. I'm going to start from my left and work my way across the top of the screen. And we have first Detective Lieutenant Michael Turcott, who is with the Morris County Sheriff's Office. So Lieutenant, thank you for being here. We appreciate it very much. Next, we have the distinguished Sheriff, Ocean County Sheriff, Michael Mastronardi. How are you, sir? Very good to see you, as always.
Good morning.
Last, but certainly not least, we have Michael Fitzgerald, who is the Monmouth County Counsel. So it's great to see you, sir, and you look very official in that counselor room there. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it a great deal. We're going to get right into it. And I think a good way for us to get started, because there are some individuals, I believe, on this workshop who want to get a better understanding of what a sheriff sale is. So and a foreclosure sale. So Sheriff and Lieutenant, we'll start with you. Can you just give us a general overview of how foreclosure sales were conducted prior to COVID? I think it'll give us a good contrast of what we're kind of dealing with now and then moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Sheriff, you want me to start with that?
Yes, go ahead, Lieutenant.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Mike Turcott, Morris County Sheriff's Office. And just as a general overview, I'm not going to try to go too in-depth, but the typical process that we'll get with foreclosure sales is when the plaintiff is going to be awarded a writ of execution signed by the chief clerk in the Superior Court down in Trenton. That writ is going to allow a plaintiff to sell a property to recoup the judgment based upon the foreclosure or the non-payment of that mortgage that the plaintiff is alleging the defendant has foregone. So once we get that writ of execution signed over to the plaintiff's attorney, they're going to send it to the sheriff's office along with some other documentation that we're going to require in order to fulfill our statutory obligations. Part of that's going to be the legal description. Part of that's going to be the affidavit of consideration and a certification of diligent inquiry. The reason I bring some of that stuff up is to kind of show, if we're talking about the way foreclosure sales were done prior to COVID. I'm just going to share on my screen here. This clip is a sheriff's sale posting from Morris County from 1906. And if any of you are attorneys that deal with this, you're going to notice pretty much that language is identical or substantially similar to what any of our advertisements look like right now, which is pretty wild when you consider how long we've been doing this. It's been almost 300 years here in Morris County. The interesting thing with how some of these sales end up going through is that a lot of the statutes that we follow, particularly 2A 50-64, which is our procedures for sale, which lay out what we can do, 61-1, which was last edited in 1979, that's our advertising, and then 61-4, which was last edited in 51, which was pretty much when 2A was conceived of. This stuff does not change. It's been very similar. Very minor changes that have happened. In the past few years, past 25 years or so, we had really more changes than we had in the prior 275. And that was brought on with the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That moratorium created a bottleneck in the courts, and it took all of us many, many years. Some of us just got out from under it right before COVID, to the point where really those last few years, call it the last 3 years or so, there were about 15,000 to 20,000 sheriff sales per year on average in New Jersey. So that's a pretty substantial number. And I would expect that everyone probably agrees that that number is not going to get smaller once these moratoriums are listed, as Mr. Fitzgerald will discuss. Really, the biggest change prior to COVID was in July in 2019, where there was some legislation that was passed and it made some substantial changes to 50-64, which now the sheriffs must conduct, they shall conduct a sale within 150 days from when we get that initial receipt. That used to be only 120 days from when we received it, and we had to only schedule it, not conduct it. So that really tightened up that time frame, and that was brought about to address the moratoriums bottleneck also. That also created the responsibility for the plaintiff's attorney to create those deeds. That has been followed to varying degrees of success around the state. And then additionally, adjournments were changed, and this was to really benefited the defendants. Now there's 2 adjournments for each plaintiff, 2 adjournments for the defendant, and then 1 if they both agree to that adjournment. And those adjournments went from 14 days to now 30 days. So that really lengthened out the amount of time that a sheriff's sale can be put off, but it also put a limit on how long it can go before it has to go to sale. Really, the COVID pandemic is probably going to be the catalyst for what's going to make the largest changes to foreclosure sales going forwards. As you've just heard, there's really not a whole lot that's changed in 250, 300 years, but I feel like we're going to see a lot that's going to be different once COVID goes through.
And I have a follow-up question for you and the sheriff. Typically, how many people show up for a sheriff sale prior to COVID?
We averaged about 100 in Ocean County once a week, and we're back up to that level again.
And were those, and prior to COVID, they were conducted in a court facility in the
We
county?
did- In Ocean County, we did in the admin. Years ago, it was in a small little room that had no distancing whatsoever. And then we took over the conference room at the administration building for the freeholders. For us, the big thing, and again, Lieutenant always does an excellent job. He's a resident expert for the state sheriff. So we thank you, Lieutenant. But one of the things that we found that hasn't changed also is the $2 fee that the sheriff's office gets. You know, it's so easy for the state to pass legislation, put an additional $300 fee in there, but our fee remains the same for the $2 per sale, right? And that's something that if they do legislation, hopefully they can amend that, because that goes to a trust fund that we're able to utilize for any improvements in the sheriff's office. Right now, in Ocean County, we have about $40-some thousand in that fund, where we don't spend a lot of money, but we get $2 per sale. What the lieutenant said was correct. The economic turndown we had when I first came here 7 years ago, we had about 300, 400, 500 sales. Then with the economic turnaround, and then plus we got hit on the Jersey Shore with Sandy, we were up to, I think the top year was about 17. We had about 2,500 sales. So we approached 2,000, went over 2,000 a year. And then we went back down. We anticipate, as the lieutenant says, post pandemic, that we're going to really go back to those levels. And it's a matter of how we schedule that out. But I think the state has to pay attention to that. We just don't get dumped on all at once, because it'll definitely impact us. But right now we're back to the levels as far as how many people come to the sales, which we'll show you later on. We're back to where we were, although we're conducting them outside.
So Sheriff, I just want to clarify something. So the only revenue that a sheriff's office generates from conducting the foreclosure sales, because there's always a lot of press written about this, is $2 per sale. Is that correct?
Correct, but the county gets the treasurer gets the money. So when we have $1 million sale, I make sure I send over to the treasurer and the administrator the amount of that sale and request additional funding.
Great, thank you. So Sheriff, I do have a question, and it's relevant to what you're saying, because there was you referenced legislation that was just passed, and there are certain new fees associated with the foreclosure intervention fund and attorney deposit. Do you have any insight or thoughts on that, or counselor, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you seen that piece of legislation? Well, now law. Lieutenant, I see you shaking your head. Lieutenant, you can jump in.
Yes, sir. I've been involved with trying to figure out exactly what we're going to do with this. There's been legislation that was passed. There's the Foreclosure Prevention Act, which really in theory is a wonderful thing. It's going to be a fund that's going to be set up that mortgagees or mortgagors are going to be able to apply for assistance in basically keeping their home, avoiding foreclosure. Now, what that did is it created a foreclosure intervention fund, which will be managed by the Housing and Mortgage Association down in state, the HMFA. The problem is the state passes this legislation and they just pass the legislation. They don't tell us what to do. And the HMFA is kind of in a similar boat with how is this going to all work. So there was a $350 fee that was added to every successful sheriff's sale. That fee, those monies are going to go to a separate fund that's going to be maintained by the HMFA at the state in order to fund this assistance program. So really what it did is it made sheriff sales more expensive. Anybody that is looking to purchase, it's going to make it more expensive for plaintiffs to buy back their properties, but it is going to help fund part of this. As Sheriff Mastriani mentioned, there's that $2 fund. We don't even get our $2 out of that because it's specified that in the $2 fund statutes, 22A4-8.1, that we can only get those fees off of any fee that's listed already in statute. So this isn't portion of that, though we can recoup some reasonable administrative costs on that intervention fund fee, which again, we're not told what's a reasonable administrative cost.
See, we have a poll question that we have to get up, but before we do that, Angela, oh, never mind. Did the governor of the state, this is the poll question for all you attorneys out there. Did the governor of the state of New Jersey issue an eviction moratorium? Yes or no? So we'll leave that up there for a minute. And so, Lieutenant, so do you expect any guidance from the state on what that reasonable fee will be? Or, I mean, do you just plan on charging a fee and see what happens?
In my experience, no, I don't expect any specific guidance on what a reasonable administrative cost is going to be.
Right.
New Jersey, with a lot of this stuff, kind of seems to be a state where, well, it doesn't say you can, but more importantly, it doesn't say you can't. So that's kind of the way I expect some of this to go with those gray area fees. So we're going to look into what a reasonable administrative cost is, what that implies. But right now, that's still up in the air. I don't expect a specific answer on that.
So again, just to clarify, the legislation said that the sheriff may collect a reasonable administration fee.
It does, and that fee
Okay.
would come out of the $350. It just doesn't say what a reasonable administrative fee is.
Right. Well, that'll keep all the attorneys, working once we figure that out, once there's litigation. When is that bill effective? When's the effective date of that? Is that immediately?
March, a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
Couple
All
weeks
right.
ago, yes. So all the sheriff's offices have started withholding those fees from any sheriff sales they're conducting. They just have nowhere to put it yet.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll have to talk after this to see if there's a way that we can kind of intervene and seek some guidance and some clarification that is helpful to the sheriff's office moving forward. So, Mr. Fitzgerald, I have not forgotten about you. And really, we were talking about, pre-COVID foreclosure sales, and then COVID hit, and there's just been, I think we're up to 236 executive orders now that impose restrictions on indoor gatherings, outdoor gatherings, social distancing protocols. Can you give us an overview on where we kind of currently stand with those executive orders and their impact on foreclosure sales?
I can try, John. That's we have. You're right. We're at 230, 240 plus, 360 some odd days into this pandemic. So it is a shifting environment, and the suggestion that I would have today, we should certainly all write in pencil, because they could change again with the issuance of another order. The executive order 230 really speaks to the most recent directive that would be applicable to sheriff sales, and it talks about indoor and outdoor gathering. And it did expand it. I think the press really covered it with reference to restaurants and social events and sporting events and that kind of thing. But in that executive order, it does specifically talk about governmental activities, for lack of a better word, on indoor and outdoor. So as Sheriff Mastronardi had talked, they've been pretty progressive in doing the outdoor sales, which is certainly much more permissive in terms of the number of folks that can then attend, weather permitting, I guess. But interestingly, 230 harkens back to Executive Order 152, which also makes reference in 152 to the fact that if you have the indoor gathering, regardless of its purpose or the percentage limitation, you have to maintain that 6-foot distancing. So for most of the counties and the sheriffs that I've been in touch with, you're then limited. The rooms are not usually very, very big. With 6-foot distancing, you will not have the attendance that you might otherwise have. And it becomes particularly difficult to then effectuate a sale. And then I guess dovetailing with what the lieutenant said, we have the statutory provision of effectuating sheriff sales within 150 days. So we're seeing, and I speak both for myself and as a result of some input from other counties counsel, that many of the foreclosures that were somewhat stalled by banks and others, efforts are being made to try to move those forward, utilizing that particular statute that talks about the sale happening within 150 days. So we're seeing motions to effectuate a sheriff's sale. And since the sheriff hasn't done a sheriff's sale in a particular county, asking that a special master be appointed. So it's both a shifting landscape with the change in executive orders, and there's a lot of moving parts as it relates to this. If time permits, John, we can certainly talk about the position that some county councils have been taking in opposing these motions for the safety of both our sheriff's officers and also the bidding public and obviously our own internal employees at the sheriff's departments.
Mike, I would like you to elaborate on that, on the effect of the special master decisions. If you can, that would be terrific.
Sure. So we, as you know, at your both behest and making it convenient for us, the county councils are all on an email chain, and we speak pretty regularly and try to meet a couple times a year, and we compare notes. And I think it's a good way for all of us to support our sheriffs, and often the clerks are involved in this as well, because the recording of these documents obviously ends up in their lap at some point in time. So the discussion that we've been having, and we've been opposing it, and we've been sharing information with the county's council on the reasons to oppose the appointment of a special master. And that reason is really pretty simple. The goal here is to kind of maximize the sale, the knockdown price, the gavel amount on a sheriff's sale for those that are moving forward. And I think as all of us know, it's probably the minority in terms of the number of sheriff sales that actually are sold at a sale. Very often they just go back to the to characterize the bank or the loaning entity for some nominal amount, and that moves along pretty quickly. However, there are homes that are desirable, or businesses or apartment buildings that are desirable, and they would normally get bid up past what some places refer to as an upset price, or the mortgage amount. And they go to sale. And so the goal here, and the reason, getting back to the special master appointment, we've been opposing those special master requests because it's difficult to get that information out, right? If the special master is appointed, how might he or she really effectuate the sale? Where might they effectuate the sale? How is that information going to get out? And then are they then effectively cutting the sheriff and the county out of being involved with that, because they will then, after the sale, turn to the sheriff and expect the sheriff to provide sheriff's officers for evictions, for example, and other things, which becomes problematic. So it's very, very difficult. It would make it a little easier if one of the executive orders, and I certainly hate to add executive orders to the list, but there should be an executive order that specifically references the suspension of that 150-day appointment of a special master provision. Obviously, that law was enacted well before there was a pandemic, certainly not targeted to a pandemic situation, and it really targets a sheriff who may not be able to keep up with his or her number of sheriff sales. And quite frankly, in New Jersey, that's not the case pre-COVID.
Now, the special masters, that's something that's supported by, in your opinion, the banking industry. Is that why, this special master was enacted? And it's been about 10, 15 years, 20 years, Mike?
Yeah, I would say that. I apologize for not knowing when that was enacted. It used to be 120 days. It was expanded to 150 a couple of years ago, as I think the lieutenant has included in some of his information. But the enactment was intended to be, and it was, I think, pushed by the community that puts money out there in the form of a mortgage, to try to effectuate those sales so they can return the property and either start collecting the money on if it's a producing asset, or sell the property if it's not a producing asset in a more efficient manner. So that's really why that was enacted. But I don't know of a county in New Jersey that was knocking on that 150-day problem before COVID. So the effort by that same group to utilize that statute as a way to get around these executive orders is not particularly impressive to me, and we've pushed back on that with success.
Would it be worthwhile to pursue legislation to eliminate the use of a special master?
I think the appropriate, yes. So the short answer is yes. And I think the way to do it, and I see the sheriff smiling, because I think that what we'd like to see is the executive order could simply add a paragraph into any one of these that says that that particular statute could not be invoked at this time, and it's suspended like residential evictions and also others.
I'm going to follow up with you, Mike, and Counselor, and the other county councils on this issue at our next meeting to see if we can craft legislation to address this issue. I think it's important and I think timely as well. I have a follow-up question for you, Mike, on the limitations on indoor and outdoor gathering and whether or not a sheriff's sale is exempt from the indoor and outdoor gathering restrictions as a judicial proceeding. There's a number of executive orders that reference that, and there's been some ongoing discussion as to whether or not a sheriff's sale is applicable or the exemptions apply to a sheriff's sale as a judicial proceeding. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
I do, and I think that so an executive order 230, and you'll see this is the rarest of things like unicorn. I'm actually looking at the law, but if you look at the executive order at paragraph 8, it talks about the executive order outdoor gathering that is a religious service, celebration, political activity, blah blah blah, legislative proceeding of state, county, or local government is not required to comply with the numerical limit on persons. And that's when it goes on. It's all other requirements for outdoor gatherings contained in Executive Order 161, and then it talks about it 152, and that's the harkening back to that other order. So I am of the opinion that this particular executive order, it exempts it. I think it was intended to be targeted at the court proceedings moving forward, obviously the judiciary, so they can start having trials, etc. But the conducting of a sheriff's sale is certainly in the judicial proceeding, quasi-judicial proceeding. So I certainly think it's exempted from the indoor limitations. However, because it refers back to those other statutory provisions, those executive orders, utilizing 152, that particular paragraph that we talked about, 1D, which says you still have to, no matter what the gathering size inside is, you still have to maintain a distance of 6 feet. And speaking from Monmouth, our particular facility holds about 110 people. And as you know, harken back to pre-COVID, it was shoulder to shoulder most sales, and that obviously can't occur now. So if you take the 6-foot distancing, we're probably at a 25 or 30 person capacity in that particular room.
That's great. That was really helpful, Mike. I know that's been a hot topic of discussion among the county councils. Before I go back to Sheriff Mashinardi and Lieutenant Turkett for some additional questions, we have another polling question that Angela is going to put up for us. There we go. Can a sheriff office and county council proceed with conducting a foreclosure sale when eviction moratorium ends? Yes or no? So we'll put that to the side. And just to clarify, what we're talking about here is vacant and abandoned properties, correct? Foreclosure sales for vacant and abandoned properties moving forward, right? Because there is a moratorium, which we didn't talk about on the eviction of tenants. Mike, you're shaking your head?
Yeah, John, I think that all three of the Michaels on your panel would shake our head, because I'm very happy to see that the bottom of the polling question says hosts and panelists cannot vote, because I would probably get it wrong, because I would have to pick maybe, right? So the difficulty now is the vacant property and some of the things that have been enacted with that would not involve an eviction, right? Because it's vacant, there's no eviction involved. It's really just it's a lockout, for lack of a better word. And that has made the lawyers creative on the bank side of the world, so that they're doing things not just trying to get an eviction or also getting foreclosures, but they're also there's a kind of a little used mechanism called an ejectment, which is really just getting the person out without the taking all the possessions out and the bailment that goes with securing property. And the mechanism in some counties is through the small claims court, and that makes it a little bit novel. And some of the judges faced with it very early on may have decided things in a way that we would not have preferred. You know, that's been a bit of a wrestling match too. So, you know, I'm not sure how this question will be answered going forward. I think that there's a lot of maybes in there other than yes and no.
Hmm. There's always a lot of maybes, right,
Keeps us in
Counselor?
business, Johnny. Keeps us in business.
That's right. So it keeps you in business. So Sheriff and Lieutenant, can you, in light of all of these restrictions on given that maybe indoor gatherings and the restrictions on indoor gatherings and outdoor gatherings might not necessarily apply, you still have to adhere to the social distancing protocols and face coverings and things of that nature. How have you conducted sheriff's foreclosure sales, particularly in Ocean County? I know you were one of the first counties to conduct the sheriff sale outdoors. So Sheriff, I know you have some pictures for us. So Angela, if you can bring them up, and then I will turn it over to you to give us an overview of what you're doing in Ocean County. And then of course, Lieutenant, you can weigh in as well.
Okay, thank you. And next slide, Angela, please. So this is a parking garage attached to the engineering department in the county complex. We looked around for a site that we would do outdoor sales that we can conducive, where we can have people dry and practice social distancing. Next slide. So we picked this is yesterday at 2 o'clock as people were coming into the sales. We had a little bit of a lineup there waiting to come in. They register. We had to work with our county buildings and grounds, who provide chairs for us, who got plexiglass in place. There are many things that we had to do so that we could practice social distancing, and our staff, I can't say enough about our staff who helped put together this presentation. Next slide. As you can see here, 6 feet, the chairs are all marked out where to put them. And when we have the sales, they come in, they do it. We make sure that there's no cars parking there the night before. Mike Fury takes care of that for us, and county security. So we had to get a microphone system in place and speakers. So it took a little bit of effort, but it's been successful at this point, and we're very pleased with it. Next slide. And you can see that this was not yesterday. Yesterday was a full crowd of over 100 people. Next. And everybody wears masks. They're separated. And we provided cards for them so they can hold up. So make sure. Next slide as they register. All right, next, please. So this is the third floor of the parking garage. You see we have over here, we have, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but we have the officer Mazer reading out the sale information. And then the clerks are separated. They have plexiglass in front of them. Next slide, please. And here he is in acknowledging people. They'll hold up their card that we have. And those cards come out quite handy because we're using them as backup shots at the vaccine center. Next. All right, now right here, you see the 22, that was the 22 person. He would hold up his orange card and then we know that he's bidding on the property. Next. Here are our clerical staff. They're behind plexiglass. Everything's sanitized. It's open air. So we've had no problem there. We had 2 incidents where the high school band nearby was playing and we had to go and tell them to please keep it down for an hour. And then yesterday, we were very thankful that the construction work on the engineering building was put on hold for an hour while we conducted our sales that generated 99,000 commission for the county. Next. Oh, and we do clean everything. So here we are, we sanitize. Our staff does an excellent job. Next slide. This is, you can't read this, but this is a statement worked out with County Counsel. Matt Thompson does an excellent job, and it's read and it talks about the eviction and the new law and what we have to do. We sent out letters to all of our vacant, all of our properties that we identified as vacant and commercial, and then it was some work. They got them back. One of the things that they did when they did the last legislation, they had the people writing the deeds. I think Monmouth County, many of our counties went back and we're typing the deeds like we used to because it was a law that was passed that really didn't make sense. And it's better that we had to actually go back to the old way prior to that law changing where you could type your own deeds. Next. Next slide, please. Oh, you can't read that. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyhow, if you were able to read it, you would say the foreclosure sales you see in you can't see 2000. Oh, I have it right here. 2018 over 2000, and you see in 20 with COVID, we dropped down to 157. And as of, well, yesterday we had another 13 to that. So we have about over 50 sales this year so far. These are the sales coming up. One was, as I said yesterday, the 13th. We have 20 April. We have about half a dozen more dates, and those are vacant. And lost you. Next slide. Oh, she's let me. Next slide, please. All right. So here you see the foreclosures amount that they get. It's 101 million. I think the main thing that you'll see is we're down almost $9 million from the year before COVID. Next. So if you see, we had there's garnishment, writs, et cetera. But in the foreclosures, we had 10 million Ocean County, 10.9 million, or roughly 11 million, and we dropped down to 2.5 million this past year because of COVID. Next, please. And there it is, the 2.5 basically million for 120 to 12/31/20. So you can see that, and we're thankful that the commissioners have certainly backed us, passed us a resolution, didn't penalize us because of the lack of income coming in. Next. And this will show you for this year, foreclosures were over $3 million. And so foreclosures to the treasurer got 179.52. You see it marked in yellow. Next. I think that's it. All right. So the bottom line is what we do is we practice social distancing. We have officers there. We've had no problems and no complaints from any of the civilians that are bidding or any of the bidders. Our officers and our staff have done an excellent job. We predict that there will be more sheriff sales when this pandemic's over. In the meantime, we're going to continue to do what we do and handle whatever we have to handle.
Yeah.
Lieutenant, anything? I'm sorry about that. I was answering a question in the
No
Q&A. So any follow-up to that? No, thank you, Sheriff. That was very good.
Yeah, I mean, Sheriff Mastronardi pretty much laid out how we're doing it in Morris also. Initially, we started in December of last year with our first actual sales since the moratoriums and everything went in early March. And we did that at our county college at a pavilion outdoors where we set up chairs 6 feet apart, tables, with the cooperation of our county college up here in Morris County. It was really cold. It went okay. We only had 4 sales, but as Mr. Fitzgerald had mentioned before, these were a few sales that we had applications for special masters on. So our county council was able to work out with them that we were going to sell those properties because they were vacant, abandoned, or commercial. And that's how we got into how we're doing it now, where we are also using a parking deck covered on a second floor of a parking deck in our county complex to do the sales. Really, the biggest difference that we have is we don't use a microphone system because I am exceedingly loud. So if anybody here has been to one of our sales, they're chuckling because I'm pretty loud when I'm in the office and outside. So that's really the only change and difference that we have with that, other than we just do not have the same volume of sales each year that Ocean does. And every county varies very, very wildly with the number of sales. You might have a county like Morris where we'll have 15 sales. Ocean may have 30, Hudson may have 75, Sussex may have 3. So it's very very varied, dependent on demographics, dependent on the financial health of the whole county overall, and the population, of course, and just the number of houses that are there.
How many, do you think that all counties now, if you can speak to this, are beginning to conduct sheriff sales again? And are they outdoors or have some moved indoors, to your knowledge?
About half have started. Pretty much everybody has done it a similar way where we are requiring a certification from the plaintiff's attorney that the property is either vacant, abandoned, or commercial. If it falls into any of those three categories and is not subject to one of the federal moratoriums, we'll sell the property. Only about half the counties in New Jersey right now are actually doing that. Volume is very, very low across all of those counties. And the counties that haven't started doing it are looking to.
And so let me ask you this. Are you taking temperatures when people come in, like as part of your safety protocols? Like what are some of the things
In Ocean County, in Ocean County, we take temperatures.
Okay. Are you requiring a COVID test or a vaccine sheet or something of that nature, or no, just the temperature check and implementing the social distancing protocols?
They sign something.
We're just keeping the social distancing protocols, wear your mask, we're outdoors. Some of the counties that are doing it indoors, I know, are a little bit more strict with that. We would be if we were inside. It would be in a building with security screening, temperature checking, all of that. But since we're outside in a parking deck and we're maintaining that distance, we're keeping it with as if it were just an outdoor gathering.
County council drew up a piece of paper that we have them sign that says they're feeling okay today or whatever, but we basically take temperatures, but temperatures only, only get so many people. We take temperatures at the sites and I think we turn around 2 people at 80,000 or 40,000 people. So temperature is only one element of it.
Great.
John, can I apologize for interjecting, but Monmouth is not, we have not been doing any sales, and we've been, in fact, resisting even the abandoned or unoccupied property measure that some other counties are doing. And our sheriff is kind of looking at the other side of the measure. Eventually, these sheriff sales will occur. So it's not that they're not going to happen. They'll just they're certainly just postponed to a certain extent. But our concern is really about the employees being potentially exposed, and Sheriff Mastronardi outside, all the things that he's doing, quite frankly, using a parking garage that he and the lieutenant are doing, and their account is brilliant. And taking temperatures, but our concern is for our employees, because there still has to be the money transfer. So there's someone who is handing money to employees. There's a lot going on that's disconcerting for us. And then the natural follow to that is after the sheriff's sale, these same folks are going to be pressing the sheriff to lock up the place. And if they happen to be wrong on whether or not it's occupied or not, then effectuating an eviction, which will then expose other employees to a potential risk there from the COVID transfer. So that's been the kind of the other side of the analysis.
Right. Interesting.
All of our employees, civilian employees at the sales have been vaccinated.
Great. Thank you. That was helpful, Mike. Thank you for interjecting. We have another poll question, and then we'll move on. So Angela, you can put that up. In New Jersey, do most renters receive 60 days at the end of a public health emergency prior to being locked out? Yes or no? And again, you don't have to get this question right. You just can't type maybe. We'll leave that up for a minute, but I read it in case you can't see it if you're using your phone or not. So Mike, I'm going to go back to you again. How has the administrative office of the courts responded to this? What are some of the guidelines and recommendations, directives that they've issued that help to guide you along the way, if any?
Did you really say I'm going back to you, Mike?
I did. Yeah, I did. Counselor, I'm sorry. Counselor.
That's all you got. That's all you got. So the courts have been very accommodating, and I think that the reality is that we know that there's it's a difficult situation, right? It's a pandemic, and there's no handbook, as some have been quoted as saying. And so I think that the courts here in Monmouth, and I talked to other county councils, have kind of tried to uniformly deal with a showing that there's an extraordinary circumstance for an eviction, and as we all know, to get granular, in some situations, the eviction has less to do with paying rent, and it may very well have to do with a familial situation, a difficult family member, someone who's causing some problems or damage, and they may be paying the rent, but they need to get those folks out. So whether it's the sheriff's sale or the eviction, all functions within the sheriff's department or universe. The courts have been considering those on a case-by-case basis, and all counties, I think, Lieutenant, all counties are requiring either some kind of a certification from counsel that the property is unoccupied if they are doing the sheriff's sales, or a court order, so that we have some invocation of a higher authority for effectuating those sales. So it's been it's been good, and I think that has helped us manage the flow, because I don't know that we're in a situation where any sheriff could conduct sales right now fully indoors and have everyone show up at the sale. That's the other concern, is are there some folks that are staying away from the sale because of their concerns or health issues that might make them reluctant to appear where they would normally be at a sale. You muted yourself, John.
Yeah, I keep doing that. I should walk around with that mute button permanently. Stay out of trouble. So Sheriff and Counselor, so we've talked about this a little bit before. I mean, when the moratorium on evictions is lifted, what do you expect? I mean, has there been any guidance or planning, again, from the administrative of the office of the courts and your offices, and how we're going to, address that?
Well, absolutely not. And you remember when this thing started last year, I started around May, what are we doing for sheriff sales on the governor's plan, and would ask those questions. And you helped on a couple, try to get answers, and we didn't, they simply weren't forthcoming. So I'm not expecting anything different at this point.
Not dissimilar from the sheriff's view. I think what's interesting is we've noticed, and I think Sheriff Mastinardi in Ocean County, many counties have seen the sale of a lot of properties that may have been in the foreclosure process because of the exodus from urban areas as a result of the pandemic. So it's going to be interesting to see how many of the sales that were in the queue disappear from the queue because of the fact that they've been sold on a quote unquote inside deal with the bank because of the current kind of, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but people moving out of urban areas into these towns and seeing the prices driven up.
So that leads me to another question, but I believe we have our final polling question. Is that right, Angela? That we're going to pull up? There's 4 of them, and I think this is the last one. So sit tight for 1 minute, and I will read it. Here we go. That's perfect, Angela. Thank you. Can online auctions be conducted through a web-based platform? That was very clever, Angela. Thank you for that, because that's my next question. I'm going to go to you, Lieutenant. Can we do that under current law currently?
I'll echo Mr. Fitzgerald. Maybe.
Okay. So here's my take on that. I'm going to say that we can't right now under current law, simply because there's no enabling statute under current law, which is something that we need to get done. I know there's a draft piece of legislation that's floating out there that hasn't been introduced as of yet. I can tell you that we've had conversations with the administrative office of the courts, and they are on board. I'm not speaking out of school, because they said that they're on board with the concept of it. But Lieutenant, talk a little bit about how you envision it working, if it's a yes and not a maybe or a no.
So yeah, I definitely think that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how it's going to be put out there. The ideal situation for that to go is going to be as an option, not as a mandate. Most sheriff's offices in New Jersey over the past year, this has been discussed quite a bit. Most sheriff's offices are very much in favor of having it as an option. All sheriff's offices don't want to be told that they have to do it that way. So what the important thing is to have the ability to stay in person, to stay in front of the people. But also, if you choose to, you can do both. You can have it live, you can have it online, if there are companies out there that can do that, or you can just choose to be completely online. How would it work? As Mr. Loomis said, with Bid for Assets, they're one option that has a web-based platform that will link up with different systems that can automatically pull a lot of the information over. Most of the sheriff's offices in New Jersey use what's called Civil Serve, which is by a company named Tyler Technologies. And Civil Serve is integrated with several of these different web platforms. And importantly, and maybe more importantly than the ones they're already integrated with, is that they have the ability to integrate with other ones through the use of various SQL servers or giving out their API keys that other companies can use to tap into and get to each office's database. We already have websites, right? Every sheriff's office has a website. Pretty much every sheriff's office is already displaying lists of foreclosure sales. There's a good bit that we do that is digital. The next step is going to be that moving to online auctions, moving to online newspaper advertising. We're still a relic, really, of the way things were with how we conduct sheriff sales now in New Jersey. And the pandemic has forced us to have this conversation of whether or not it's time to move into that digital age with these online platforms. And I think it definitely will work. The amount of money that we've seen through the various companies that have done this, I've done several demos with the Sheriff's Association Civil Process Committee. And every one of them all really show a huge increase, not only in the number of sales, but in the amount of money that each county gets back. And that's really important for several reasons. It's because of that ripple effect, right? If we bring in more money, if we sell more properties, more of these banks are getting more money towards their judgments. They're not now having to go and sell it as an REO property and maybe or maybe not get the money back that they're owed from these delinquent mortgages. That in return helps the public at large with better deals on mortgages. There's less vacant homes, neighborhoods stay together. Additionally, that money that goes to the counties helps, as I'm sure as many of the county administration folks that are here, that helps to offset quite a few costs that otherwise may have to be fueled by tax increases or diversions from other programs. Sheriff Mastronardi mentioned that $2 fund. The more sales that we can actually do, the more fees that we pull in, the greater the benefit really is for the public and for individual consumers in the housing market, I think. You're muted again, sir.
Keep doing that. There's a protest on West 8th Street. I was telling all the panelists before. So if you hear drums and people protesting, which I'm not quite sure yet what they're protesting, that's why I keep muting myself. But anyway, Counselor, I know you have some concerns about online auctions. I mean, we certainly support it. It will certainly, I think, help, with the workload, even when the moratorium on evictions is lifted. But what are some concerns that I know you've shared with the other county councils?
I have shared those, and thanks, John. And I want to make sure that I leave a couple of minutes for the sheriff to weigh in, because he lives and breathes it. But my concerns are these. Before, and I'm for John and others with in my previous life, I was exposed to some of this other stuff in terms of the online mechanism and the platform. And I'll just kind of rattle off a couple of questions that I have. What exactly is the sheriff's charge in a sheriff's sale, right? Is it to do it as quickly as possible, or is it to do it as efficiently as possible, or is it to do it to maximize the return for whoever the person is that may be, Mrs. McGillicuddy's in her house? Is our obligation to make sure we get as much as we can for her if she's in foreclosure, and minimize that problem. In a conversation that I had with one of the platforms involved, it wasn't Bid for Assets, the sponsor today, but as many of you know, Gov Assets, GovSell, Hubzu, Zillow, all of these folks are all platforms that are offering to do this stuff. But the question that I raised pre-pandemic with one of the folks that gave us a presentation, the lieutenant is familiar with, was who owns the data? So the folks are talking about coming in from the very beginning and saying, hey, we'll take the block and lot, we'll take all the information, we'll digitize it, and we can put it out there. At that time, I posed the question, okay, if you put it out there, will you put it out there for everybody so that all these digital platforms can have it? And if you happen to be on, if we're talking about housesrealtor.com instead of Zillow or Hubzu or something else, are you going to have access to that information? Under the current statute, how exactly is the sheriff supposed to get the cash money and certified checks standing there if I got a bidder from Indiana? And how do I know who that bidder really is? Do I have shields or shills? And I say this by saying I agree with the lieutenant and the sheriff. This is the future. It is what ought to happen. It ought to be out there in these in the World Wide Web, because the World Wide Web goes way further than the newspaper that we advertise in now, and we're statutorily obligated to advertise it now. But I think the safeguards have to be put in place to make sure that we don't make mistakes when you have, as we all read in the newspaper, smart teenagers who can outwit all of us with Bitcoin and SPACs and some of the other blockchain availability things that these folks are coming up with. Imagine what they might do in a sheriff's sale, and either driving the price up, keeping the price suppressed, or completely fouling the sheriff's sale if it were somehow hacked. So I have some grave concerns about that. I agree it's the future, but I'm not sure it's the future right now. And as we all know, and I say that with friends in the legislature, the thought of the legislature keeping up with what the smart folks are doing on the World Wide Web is, a big fat zero.
So, Mike, are your concerns something that we could address through legislation?
I think the lieutenant's point and the sheriff's point, when we've spoken offline, are well taken. Is that we're best served if we get ahead of this. So I think from NJAC's perspective, we probably ought to predict and define the landscape as opposed to having it happen to us. The reality is that, and we could put together legislation that allowed a county to do that, but not forces them to do it. If the beta test of someone running these platforms turns out to be problematic, or there's a hacking, the sheriff needs to be able to pivot and go back to the old school, have a sale in the somewhere in a building or in a parking garage, and you don't want to move to that new platform where we're obligated if it's not going to work. So I think it's truly a brave new world. It's a digital world, but we're not a digital operation just yet.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Counselor. And anything that you can share with us in writing that we can address through legislation, please let me know. And if NJAC can help in any way, we're happy to do that. Likewise with the Sheriff's Association, if we can help to advocate for legislation that will allow for this platform, because again, I do think we're going to need some enabling legislation to allow for it to officially happen, or you might get a letter from the administrative office of the courts or the attorney general telling that you can't do it. So we're happy to work on this issue moving forward. Any final thoughts? I'll start with you, Lieutenant. Any final thoughts from you?
Thanks, John. Just basically that, to go with the title of the class, Future Foreclosure Sales, I think we're going digital. And, my hope is that with the climate that's out there, it's a focus more on compassionate execution of our responsibilities. There are a lot of people that are going to be struggling, a lot of people that are losing their homes through no fault of their own. Their business was shut down, they lost their house. That's not something they should be punished for. But unfortunately, that is the reality. I'm hoping through things like this Foreclosure Prevention Act, our office has started something called Hope Hub, which is a program that connects many different resources, whether it's housing, financial aid, drug treatment, mental health, all of these different types of facilities, and can connect a person to all of them through kind of like a one-stop shop. And that really does tie in with the sheriff's sales. With the fact that, let's be honest, we make people homeless when we do an eviction. So, that's kind of my hope for the future of how things go. And, just going to do our best to get there.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I had an opportunity to speak with Officer Whiting about the program, and it sounds like a terrific program. So I'm glad you brought that up. I appreciate it. Counselor, any final thoughts from you?
Just a few. The first is don't panic. You know, the reality is that we haven't faced a pandemic before, but nobody would have predicted Sandy. No one would have predicted many of the things that our sheriffs and our office staff, talking about the lieutenant, have been able to effectuate, and we'll get through it. We'll figure out a way to get through it. But one of the things that I think is so critical in this is the legislature has given the sheriff an immense responsibility, but depending on the county, he or she's immense responsibility is appropriately handled because the sheriff doesn't have a using the vernacular, a dog in the fight. The reality is the sheriff is doing it for the right reason, to effectuate the transfer of the property in a fair and legal and open manner. That will continue, whether it's online or whether it's not, or whether it's one way or the other. We'll get there, and given the choice, I think that the sheriff 100 times out of 100 gets the job done.
Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate it. Sheriff, any final thoughts from you?
Well, yeah, I agree with Lieutenant. I thank the council for his input, and Mike, as always, Lieutenant does a great job. I agree with him that I think in the near future, you'll see a hybrid before we go totally, online with sales. I think that most of the bidders like to be in that process. So sometimes they have questions, whatever. And the transaction, as the counselor said, about monies and how we're going to do that. And Bitcoin, who the hell knows, as you say, where's that going to go in this cyber currency situation? But these are all things that, that will be addressed, I guess, in the future. But near future, I see us having the sales going back. As I said, we were frustrated last year, and we came up with an idea with as we had a roundtable with our staff, how can we do it? And thank the county administration, the county commissioners came up and agreed and gave us all the resources that we can conduct the sales as we have in Ocean County. I do see the horror stories that we have, particularly at the Jersey Shore, where there were evictions pending, there were sales pending, and people just wouldn't leave, and they took advantage of the pandemic. And it's really the horror stories where they said they wouldn't leave the summer vacation, the winter rental, and these people had the mortgage to that property and couldn't get the people to leave. Some even, we had to refer to the prosecutor, said, yeah, if you give me cash, then I'll leave. So it wasn't pandemic related. So some people, unfortunately, listen, this pandemic's impacted a lot of people. Some people are taking advantage of it. And I think as a result of that, there's going to be a lot of homeowners that are going to be suffering and caught up in this for the, come September or whenever this thing eases up.
Yeah, thank you, Sheriff. That's insightful. And I, for one, miss you on those daily briefing calls. I hopefully we have one at 12 o'clock. Hopefully you can jump on that one. But just want to take this time to thank you, Counselor, Sheriff, of course, and Lieutenant. Just thank you for your time. I thought this was a terrific conversation, very helpful. And maybe we can do this again at NJAC's conference in October, because I'm sure we'll have some new news to report and hopefully some positive news to report at that time. Again, if you are looking for your CLE or other continuing education credits, please see Kim Nolan in our office. Thanks again to our panelists and to Bid for Assets for their sponsorship, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.